behind the mic. Join us every Tuesday, 10 a.m. West African time, 900 GMT on Anchor, Hubhopper Studio, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Podbean, and other podcast platforms. You can type tell_faithful podcast on whatever browser you're using, and you'll be there with just one click. Tell Faithful Podcast is a podcast where we talk about lifestyle, entertainment, society, and culture. It's also a time to voice out our fears and worries and share our happiness and joy. Please hit the subscribe button so you'll be able to get first-hand information each time we post an episode or an update. Hit the like button, please, to show your appreciation towards this podcast. And please hit the share button to share this amazing podcast with your family, friends, and loved ones. Thank you so much for doing that. So, we are still in the season of the 7 continents, and last week we shared an episode on Africa, using Nigeria as a country in Africa. So, just a quick recap on last week's episode. We said that Africa makes 70% of the world's cocoa beans used to make chocolates, and most of the world's cocoa beans come from 4 West African countries, which include Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Ivory Coast. Did you also know that Sudan used to be the largest country in Africa until it was split into Sudan and South Sudan? But Algeria is now the largest by its geographical size. Now did you also know that Nigeria is the most populous country with an estimated population in 2021 of about 211.4 million? We won't be going into that right now, so please, if you haven't listened to the previous episode, please go back and listen to it, because you really have a lot to gain from it. So today we'll be talking about the continent Antarctica. It's going to be a short episode, unlike that of last week. So Antarctica, the southernmost continent and site of the North Pole, is a virtually uninhabited ice-covered landmass here. So the peninsula's isolated terrain also shelters rich wildlife, including many penguins. I know you've heard of penguins. Wondering where they come from? It's from the continent Antarctica. So Antarctica doesn't belong to anyone. There is no single country that owns the continent. Instead, it is governed by a group of nations in a unique international partnership. The Antarctic Treaty was signed in Washington, D.C. on 1st December 1959 by 12 nations that had been active during the IGY, and it includes Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, France, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, United Kingdom, United States, and USSR. In Antarctica, in addition to English, there are small but sizable populations of German, Spanish, French, Japanese, Chinese, and Italian speakers among them. Now, over to facts about Antarctica. This is where the highlight starts. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Did you know that Asia is the largest and the most populated continent in the world, home to over 4.6 billion people? Did you know that 90% of the world's rice is consumed in Asian countries? Did you also know that the tallest buildings in the world can be found in Asia? Want to know more about this? Then join Tell Faithful Podcast on the 22nd day of November 2022 as the amazing host Faithful discusses these facts in full details. Thank you guys so much for staying tuned. Now back to the show. Antarctica is a unique continent among all the 7 continents in this world. The word Antarctica comes from the Greek term Antarctica, which means the opposite to Arctic or opposite to the north. Antarctica is the 5th largest continent, lying in the southernmost part of the earth. It is almost double the size of Australia. The particularly sparse human population on Antarctica comprises visiting scientists, support staff, and tourists. Interestingly, the last continent to be discovered, Antarctica, remained hidden behind barriers of fog, storm, and sea ice until it was first sighted in the early 19th century during the polar exploration. As a result of the extreme cold and lack of native people, forests, land animals, and obvious natural resources, the continent remained largely neglected for decades after discovery. Source: scientific expeditions and seal hunters had explored only fragments of its coast by the end of the 19th century, while the interior remained unknown. It was recorded that explorers first reached the South Pole in 1911, and the first permanent settlements, scientific stations, were established in the early 1940s. From that time, the pace of exploration and scientific research has accelerated rapidly. In the mid to the late 20th century, the region's majestic scenery and wildlife began to attract increasing numbers of tourists. The following nations claim territory in Antarctica. They are Argentina, Australia, the United Kingdom, Chile, France, New Zealand, and Norway. More nations with this claim include the United States and Russia. However, these states do not acknowledge these claims and make no claims of their own, but reserve rights to claim territory in the future. Therefore, since 1961, the continent has been administered under the Antarctic Treaty, an international agreement to preserve the continent for peaceful scientific study. Although Antarctica features harsh living conditions, a number of plants and animals have adapted to survive and call the icy continent home. Popular animals that live in Antarctica include penguins and seals. Now, approximately 90% of the ice on Earth is found in Antarctica. In fact, sea levels would rise around 60 meters or 200 feet if all the ice in Antarctica were to melt. Virtually covered by ice, Antarctica has very little land available for soils to form or vegetation to settle. The existing soils were formed lately in the continent's geologic history and have little organic content or water holding capacity. Antarctica's isolation from other continents makes it difficult for new types of vegetation to spread to Antarctica. Also, the constantly low temperatures, high winds, and lack of moisture discourage the growth of virtually all plants except the highly adapted ones, which may be capable of active growth for only a few days per year. Now, the dry valleys in Antarctica are the driest places on Earth. With such low humidity and moisture on this portion of the continent, snow and ice cannot even accumulate, which leaves the valleys as just a dusty expanse of dirt. Antarctica is on average the windiest place on Earth. Scientists exploring this southerly landmass have reported wind speeds that have reached up to 200 miles per hour. An Antarctic ice sheet is the single biggest mass of ice in the world and can sometimes be up to 4 miles thick. The continent as a whole contains about 90% of the planet's freshwater ice and around 70% of the total freshwater on Earth. Scientists claim that if the West Antarctic ice sheet were to melt, it would raise global sea levels by about 16 feet. While Antarctica is covered in ice, it actually holds one of the world's biggest mountain ranges. Another interesting geographic feature hidden under the ice sheet is Lake Vostok, a freshwater lake buried under 4 kilometers of frozen water. This lake is about the size of Lake Ontario and is one of more than 200 different bodies of water